I gave up my savings, my time, and my peace to save my sister's life. But when she called it hard work, I realized the betrayal cut deeper than I thought. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and this story is about my sister, Hannah, who's 28. We've always been close, even as kids. When our parents divorced, I was 14, and she was only 10. It felt like my job to look out for her, especially since our mom worked 2 jobs, and our dad wasn't in the picture much after the split. I guess that sense of responsibility just stuck with me. Fast forward to last year, and Hannah was in a rough place. She'd been dating this guy for about 3 years, and when they broke up, it completely derailed her life. I'm talking about the kind of breakup where someone just falls apart. She lost her job because she kept missing shifts, and then her landlord kicked her out for not paying rent. For months, she bounced between friends' couches, and it was clear she was barely holding it together. That's when I stepped in. I had a spare room in my apartment, so I told her she could stay with me for as long as she needed. I didn't ask for rent or anything. She didn't have a job, and I didn't want her stressing about money on top of everything else. My thinking was, if I could give her a stable place to land, maybe she could start putting the pieces of her life back together. At first, it was manageable. I'd come home from work to find her still in her pajamas, scrolling on her phone, or binging Netflix. It was frustrating, but I told myself she needed time to heal. I'd bring up job applications or suggest she update her resume, and she'd nod along. But nothing really happened. Weeks turned into months, and it became clear she needed more of a push. So I started helping her with her job hunt. I work in sales, and I have a decent network of contacts. I reached out to friends and old coworkers, asking if they knew of any openings. I even forwarded her resume to a few places, though I had to basically write it for her because she kept putting it off. Eventually, she started getting interviews. She'd get excited and plan outfits the night before, but there were a few times she canceled last minute, saying she wasn't ready. Each time, I'd tell her it was okay and that we'd try again. It felt like we were making progress, even if it was slow. Meanwhile, helping her meant putting some of my own plans on hold. I'd been saving up to buy a house, but with the extra grocery bills and covering her phone and car payments, my savings account wasn't growing the way I'd hoped. I also stopped going out as much. Hosting Hannah's friends for dinners or small get-togethers was cheaper than going out, and it seemed like a good way to help her rebuild her social circle. About 6 months in, things started to change. Hannah landed a marketing job at a small firm. It wasn't a dream position, but it was a solid start. She was thrilled, and I was proud of her. With a steady paycheck, we sat down together and made a budget to help her get back on track financially. She had credit card debt from when she was unemployed, but we worked out a plan to pay it off over time. I even co-signed the lease on her new apartment because her credit wasn't strong enough on its own. By the 1-year mark, she was almost unrecognizable from the person who'd moved into my spare room. She was confident, busy with work, and hanging out with friends regularly. It felt like all the late nights, financial sacrifices, and emotional energy I'd put into helping her had paid off. She was back on her feet, and honestly, it felt good to see her thriving. But then something shifted. She stopped calling as much, and when we did talk, the conversations felt rushed. She started canceling plans last minute, saying she was swamped with work or had other commitments. At first, I brushed it off she was busy, and that was a good thing. But then mutual friends started mentioning that Hannah had been telling people she'd rebuilt her life on her own, which felt like a slap in the face. The breaking point came at a family dinner. Our mom had invited everyone over, and the conversation turned to how well Hannah was doing. Someone asked how she managed to turn things around, and Hannah shrugged it off, saying it was all about hard work and perseverance. I waited for her to mention the help I'd given her, even just a quick acknowledgement, but it never came. She sat there smiling, as if the past year hadn't happened. I didn't say anything at the time, but I couldn't stop thinking about it afterward. All the late nights, the financial stress, the sacrifices, it felt like none of it mattered to her. I started wondering if I'd been a crutch instead of a support system, and whether I'd enabled her to take advantage of me without even realizing it. That's what led me here to Reddit. I guess I just needed to write it all out and see if anyone else has been through something similar. Am I overthinking this? Did I expect too much? Or is it fair to feel hurt when someone you helped so much acts like you didn't? Update 1. After posting about the situation with Hannah on Reddit, I decided to confront her during our next family gathering. It felt like the right time. Everyone would be there, and I thought it might help to have a mediator if things got heated. Our mom had planned a small dinner for the immediate family, so I knew Hannah would show up. The night started normally. Mom was bustling around the kitchen, asking me to help set the table, while Hannah arrived a little late, claiming work had kept her. She brought a bottle of wine, laughing and chatting like nothing was wrong. It felt awkward pretending everything was fine when I had so much I wanted to say. I waited until after dinner, Once the dishes were cleared and everyone had moved to the living room, before I brought it up, I started by saying I wanted to talk about something that had been bothering me. Everyone paused, looking at me. Hannah raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. I told her I'd been hearing from mutual friends that she was downplaying the help I'd given her last year. I brought up how hard I worked to support her emotionally, financially, and professionally when she was at her lowest. I asked her why she never mentioned any of it to others, even when it came up naturally in conversation. Hannah stayed quiet at first, but then she said she didn't feel like she owed me constant recognition for something I chose to do. Her tone was calm but firm, which made it sting more. She said she had worked hard to rebuild her life and didn't want to be seen as someone who couldn't handle things on her own. The conversation spiraled quickly. I reminded her of the specific things I'd done, paying her bills, setting up job interviews, co-signing her lease. I wasn't trying to rub it in her face. I just wanted her to acknowledge the reality of what happened. Hannah shot back that I was keeping score and making her feel guilty for moving on with her life. She accused me of being controlling, saying I wanted her to stay dependent on me so I could feel like the hero. At that point, our mom stepped in. She told us to stop arguing and tried to mediate, but her comments only made things worse. She said I needed to let it go and focus on the fact that Hannah was doing well now. She added that Hannah's success should be enough of a thank you and that I was being too sensitive. I couldn't believe it. Mom knew everything I'd done to help, and it felt like she was completely dismissing my efforts. Then Hannah said something that really hit me. She admitted she felt embarrassed about how much help she needed last year and didn't want her new friends or coworkers to see her that way. She said she was trying to build a new image for herself and didn't want to dwell on the past. It was the first time she'd been honest about why she was acting the way she was, but it didn't make it hurt any less. I told her I felt betrayed. I explained that I wasn't looking for her to grovel or bring it up all the time, but some acknowledgement, especially in private, would have gone a long way. I said I needed some space to process everything, and that I wasn't sure how to move forward with our relationship right now. Hannah didn't seem fazed. She shrugged and said, "Do what you need to do," before grabbing her bag and leaving. After she left, our mom tried to talk to me about it, but I told her I didn't want to discuss it anymore. I felt drained. Over the next few days, I confided in a few close friends. They were supportive and said I'd been enabling Hannah for too long. One friend pointed out that Hannah was an adult and needed to take responsibility for her actions, not just rewrite history to suit her narrative. That weekend, I noticed Hannah had posted on social media about her journey to success. It was one of those motivational captions about hard work and perseverance, but there was no mention of me or anyone who helped her along the way. It felt like a public erasure of everything I'd done for her. Then, a mutual friend reached out. They said Hannah had been downplaying the help she received when talking to their friend group, acting like she'd done it all on her own. I was hurt, but not surprised. What did catch me off guard was a message from one of Hannah's new friends. They told me Hannah had mentioned some of the things I'd done for her, and they wanted to thank me for being such a supportive brother. It was nice to hear, but it made me question why Hannah was willing to admit it to them, but not to me or our mutual friends. I started wondering if I was overreacting. Maybe I'd been too harsh, and Hannah had a point about me keeping score. I posted another update on Reddit, asking if I should let it go or push her to acknowledge my contributions. The responses were mixed. Some said I deserved recognition for everything I'd done, while others warned me against holding grudges. In the end, I decided to take a step back. I stopped reaching out to Hannah and focused on my own life. If she came around and acknowledged what I'd done, great. If not, at least I'd stopped letting her actions dictate my peace of mind. For now, it felt like the best way forward. Update 2. It's been weeks since the argument at the family dinner, and Hannah hasn't reached out. I decided early on that I wouldn't be the one to break the silence this time. Part of me thought she might come around, but instead there was just nothing. I spent most of those weeks focusing on work and catching up with friends I hadn't seen in a while. It felt like I was starting to get my life back. Then, I ran into Hannah unexpectedly at a party hosted by one of our mutual friends. I wasn't planning to go, but a friend convinced me at the last minute. When I arrived, I saw her almost immediately. She was standing by the bar, laughing with a group of people I didn't recognize. She looked polished, like she was perfectly put together. I went over to say hi, and she greeted me politely, but it was distant, like we were acquaintances, not siblings. We exchanged a few pleasantries, and I tried to steer the conversation toward what had happened between us. I asked if we could talk, even just for a few minutes. She glanced around and said she was too busy catching up with everyone. Before I could say much else, she introduced me to her new boyfriend, who was standing nearby. He seemed nice enough, but completely oblivious to the tension. As the night went on, I noticed how easily Hannah seemed to fit into this new circle of friends. At one point, She stood up to give a little toast about how proud she was of her latest career milestone, a promotion at work. She talked about how hard she'd worked to climb the ladder and how perseverance had paid off. Everyone clapped and cheered, and I just sat there, feeling like I'd been written out of the story. She didn't mention me at all, not even in passing. It was as if the year I spent helping her rebuild her life never happened. I left the party early, not wanting to cause a scene, but it was hard to shake the feeling that Hannah had completely erased me from her life. Later that week, I met up with a close friend and told them what had happened. They weren't surprised and told me I'd been too nice to Hannah for too long. They said it was time to stand up for myself and stop letting her take advantage of my kindness. It was something I'd heard before, but this time it hit differently. I started to wonder if I'd been too pushy while helping Hannah, and maybe that's why she was acting this way now. A few days later, I decided to book a session with a therapist. I'd been holding onto a lot of resentment and needed to figure out how to move forward. In therapy, I started unpacking the guilt I'd carried for years, feeling like I had to take care of Hannah because no one else would. It became clear that I'd been putting her needs ahead of my own for far too long. Around this time, my mom called me to check in. The conversation quickly turned to Hannah, and she told me I needed to stop keeping score and just focus on my own life. She said Hannah had been through enough and didn't need me adding to her stress. It was frustrating, but I didn't argue. I just let her talk and ended the call as quickly as I could. As I was reviewing my finances that week, I realized I was still paying off debt from the time Hannah stayed with me. Between covering her bills, co-signing her apartment lease, and all the little expenses that added up, it was a bigger burden than I'd fully acknowledged before. It felt like I was still cleaning up the aftermath of her rough patch while she was out living her best life. Then, out of the blue, Hannah texted me. She didn't mention the argument or anything that had happened. Instead, she asked for help with a new project at work. She said she needed someone to proofread a report she was putting together. The message was casual, like nothing had ever happened between us. I thought about it for a while before responding. Eventually, I told her I was too busy to help. It wasn't a lie. I had a lot on my plate, but it was also about setting boundaries. I couldn't keep dropping everything to bail her out, especially when she hadn't even acknowledged what I'd already done. Hannah didn't take it well. She sent a follow-up message accusing me of being petty and holding a grudge. She said she thought we were past all that, and that she didn't understand why I was being so difficult. I didn't reply. It felt like there was no point in arguing with her. I updated Reddit about the situation, asking if I was wrong to say no to her request. The responses were mixed. Some people said I was justified in setting boundaries, while others warned me about letting resentment take over. A few even suggested I apologize and try to rebuild the relationship, but I wasn't sure if that was the right move. For now, I've decided to keep focusing on therapy and working through my own feelings. If Hannah wants to reach out and have an honest conversation, I'm open to it. But I'm done being the one who always makes the first move. After posting my second update on Reddit, things took an unexpected turn. The post gained a lot of traction, with hundreds of comments pouring in. Most people supported my decision to set boundaries with Hannah, though a few pointed out that cutting her off entirely might make things worse in the long run. The mixed feedback gave me plenty to think about, but I stood by my decision not to help her with the project. I thought that would be the end of it, but Hannah had other plans. Over the next week, mutual friends started reaching out to me. Apparently, Hannah had been vetting to anyone who would listen. She'd framed the situation in a way that made it sound like I was jealous of her success and refusing to support her out of spite. One friend even told me Hannah said I'd always been competitive with her, which couldn't have been further from the truth. Hearing this only solidified my decision to keep my distance. Then my parents got involved. Mom called me one evening, clearly upset. She told me Hannah had mentioned I refused to help her with her project, and that she didn't understand why I was being so petty. Mom said I needed to forgive and forget because Hannah was my sister, and family should always come first. I tried to explain my side, but she wasn't interested. It was frustrating, but I stayed calm and told her I wasn't going to change my mind. That same week, I had another therapy session. We talked about how my parents' tendency to side with Hannah had always made me feel like I had to step up and fix things. For the first time, I realized I didn't have to play that role anymore. My therapist encouraged me to set boundaries not just with Hannah, but with my parents too. It wasn't easy, but I started pushing back when they tried to guilt-trip me. Meanwhile, I started digging into my finances again, trying to clean up the mess left over from last year. That's when I realized I was still tied to Hannah's apartment lease. Co-signing had felt like the right thing to do at the time, but now it was a constant reminder of how much I'd sacrificed. I reached out to a lawyer to see if I could remove my name from the lease, but it turned out to be more complicated than I expected. I'd need Hannah's cooperation, which I doubted I'd get. Around the same time, I heard through a mutual friend that Hannah was struggling at work. She'd missed a deadline on a big project and was getting heat from her boss. The friend suggested I should reach out to her, but I wasn't sure what good that would do. Every time I tried to help Hannah, it seemed to blow up in my face. A few days later, Hannah sent me a text. It was passive-aggressive, accusing me of abandoning her when she needed me most. She didn't ask for help directly, but it was clear she wanted me to swoop in and fix things again. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on my own progress in therapy and at work. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was starting to move forward. That didn't stop Hannah from escalating things. One of our mutual friends told me she'd lashed out after they suggested she was being unfair. Hannah doubled down, saying she'd done nothing wrong and that I was the one creating drama. Then she took it public. She posted a vague rant on social media about selfish family members who abandon you when you're finally doing well. While she didn't name me directly, anyone who knew us could tell who she was talking about. The post sparked a mini drama in our extended family. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years started reaching out, asking what was going on. I kept my responses short, refusing to air dirty laundry. But it was exhausting. Despite the temptation, I didn't respond to Hannah's post. Engaging would have only made things worse. Amid all this chaos, something good finally happened. I got a promotion at work, a goal I'd been working toward for years, but had put on hold while supporting Hannah. The timing couldn't have been better. A few days later, an old family friend who didn't know about the drama reached out to congratulate me. They mentioned how proud my parents must be, and while I didn't correct them, it was a reminder that I didn't need Hannah's validation to feel accomplished. The family tension reached its peak when I decided to skip an upcoming gathering. I told my parents I wouldn't attend if Hannah was there, explaining that I didn't want to be in a toxic environment. They weren't happy, but I stood my ground. It was the first time I prioritized my own peace over keeping the family happy, and it felt like a step in the right direction. When I posted this third update on Reddit, it blew up even more than the last one. People flooded the comments with messages of support, telling me I was right to set boundaries and stop enabling Hannah. Many called out my parents' enabling behavior, saying it was time they held Hannah accountable instead of expecting me to fix everything. Reading those comments was validating and reminded me I wasn't alone in this. For now, I'm focusing on myself and keeping my distance from Hannah. Whether she comes around or not, I know I'm making the right choice for my own well-being. Update for a few weeks after my last update. Hannah's professional struggles went from bad to worse. I heard through the grapevine that a major project she'd been leading at work had completely flopped. Not only did she miss a key deadline, but the final presentation fell apart, costing her team a big client. As a result, she was demoted. It wasn't hard to imagine how this news had gone over with her new circle of friends and coworkers, the very people she'd been trying to impress. I braced myself for the inevitable fallout, and sure enough, it wasn't long before my parents called. My mom was especially upset, claiming I'd abandoned Hannah during a critical time. She reminded me of how much Hannah had been struggling and implied that if I'd helped her with her project when she asked, things might have turned out differently. I calmly reminded her of everything I'd already done for Hannah. The years she lived with me rent-free, the bills I'd paid, the job interviews I'd lined up. I told her I couldn't keep sacrificing my time and resources for someone who refused to acknowledge it. That didn't go over well. Mom insisted family was supposed to stick together, but I held firm and ended the call. Not long after, I got a notice from Hannah's landlord. Apparently, she'd missed her last 2 rent payments, and since I was still listed as a co-signer on her lease, they were letting me know my credit could be affected if the situation wasn't resolved soon. This was the breaking point for me. I couldn't keep letting Hannah's decisions impact my financial stability. I reached out to Hannah directly, giving her an ultimatum: either she started paying her rent on time, or I would take legal steps to remove myself from the lease. Her response was as dramatic as I expected. She accused me of being heartless and brought up all the little things she'd done for me over the years, as if that balanced out the thousands of dollars I'd spent helping her get back on her feet. She refused to take responsibility and even implied that I owed her for always being there for me growing up. It was clear we weren't going to resolve this easily. Frustrated, I turned to Reddit again, updating everyone about the situation and asking for advice. The response was overwhelming. Comment after comment encouraged me to protect my financial future and stop enabling Hannah's irresponsibility. Some users even shared similar experiences with entitled family members, which made me feel less alone. The consensus was clear: I needed to take action. With that encouragement, I went back to my lawyer and started the process of removing my name from the lease. It wasn't easy, But with the legal notice in place, Hannah had no choice but to take over full responsibility for the apartment or face eviction. Predictably, she didn't handle it well. She called me furious, claiming I was ruining her life. I didn't engage. I was done being the safety net she took for granted. The fallout with my family was immediate. My parents were livid, accusing me of pushing Hannah to the brink. Mom even suggested I should have covered the rent myself to avoid the situation escalating. I reminded her that Hannah was an adult and that this was a consequence of her own choices. It was a tense conversation, and for the first time I felt like there was a real divide between us. As expected, Hannah couldn't manage the rent on her own and was eventually evicted. She moved in with a friend, though she made sure everyone knew she blamed me for her situation. She told anyone who would listen that I'd abandoned her and left her to fend for herself when she needed me most. It was frustrating, but I refused to let it get to me. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of relief. With the lease issue resolved, I no longer had to worry about Hannah's financial decisions affecting me. Therapy helped me understand that I'd spent too much of my life trying to fix things for Hannah, and it was okay to step back and focus on myself. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. A few weeks later, Hannah sent me a text. It was a half-hearted apology, something about how she didn't mean to hurt me and hoped we could move past everything. It felt more like desperation than genuine remorse. I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in opening that door again without real accountability from her. Since then, I've been focusing on my own goals. I've started saving for a house again and even booked a solo trip abroad, something I'd always wanted to do but had put off because of Hannah. Life feels lighter without the constant stress of her drama weighing me down. As for Hannah, I've heard from mutual friends that she's still struggling to get her life together. Part of me hopes this experience will be a wake-up call for her, but I'm not holding my breath. For now, I'm choosing to maintain my distance and keep growing on my own terms. It's not easy, but it's the healthiest choice I've made in years. It's been a few months since my last update, and a lot has changed. After cutting ties with Hannah and resolving the lease situation, my life took a turn for the better. For the first time in years, I've been able to focus on myself, and it's been a relief to live without constant drama. Her work has been going great. The promotion I mentioned in my last update opened up new opportunities, and I've been thriving in my role. With the extra income, I started saving for a down payment on a house, a goal I'd put off for years while helping Hannah. I also started dating seriously again and met someone I really click with. It feels good to be moving forward. Therapy has been a game changer. Over time, I've worked through a lot of the guilt and responsibility I'd carried for Hannah since we were kids. I finally understand that it's not my job to fix her life or absorb the fallout from her decisions. That clarity has been empowering and has helped me set healthier boundaries. Not just with Hannah, but with my parents, too. Speaking of my parents, they've been trying to reconcile. They reached out a few weeks ago, suggesting we all get together for dinner. I agreed, but I made it clear that I didn't want to talk about Hannah. At dinner, the tension was still there, but I stuck to my boundaries. They brought up how families should stick together, and I redirected the conversation every time. By the end of the evening, I think they realized I wasn't going to budge. It's a small step, but I feel like they're starting to respect my limits. Meanwhile, I've heard through mutual friends that Hannah is still struggling. She's been couch surfing and hopping between temp jobs, but nothing seems to stick. From what I've gathered, she hasn't taken any real accountability for how things ended between us. Instead, she's still blaming me for not stepping in to help when things went downhill. It's sad, but I've learned to let go of the urge to swoop in and fix things. In the past few months, I've also found a lot of support, both online and offline. The Reddit community has been amazing, and I've connected with people in similar situations. It's been validating to hear from others who've had to deal with entitled family members and learn how they handled it. In real life, I've reconnected with old friends and built a stronger support network, which has made a huge difference. One of the biggest wins recently was taking my first solo vacation abroad. It's something I'd always wanted to do, but I could never afford it while supporting Hannah. Booking that trip felt like a milestone, a tangible reminder of how far I've come. I spent 2 weeks exploring a new country, eating amazing food, and just enjoying the freedom of doing something purely for myself. It was exactly what I needed. Of course, the extended family couldn't resist getting involved. A few relatives reached out after hearing about the fallout with Hannah, urging me to make peace. Some even implied I was being too harsh and needed to let bygones be bygones. I stood firm and explained that I wasn't holding a grudge. I was just protecting my peace. Most of them backed off after that, though a couple still tried to guilt-trip me. I didn't let it get to me. Then, out of nowhere, Hannah reached out again. This time, her tone was different. She apologized for how she treated me and asked if we could meet to talk things through. I was cautious. I told her I'd agree to meet, but only if she was ready to take full accountability for her behavior. She agreed, so we set up a coffee meeting. When we met, Hannah looked different, tired, but humbled. She started by admitting she'd taken me for granted and let her pride get in the way of acknowledging everything I'd done for her. She apologized sincerely, not just for the recent drama, but for the years of entitlement and manipulation. She broke down at one point, saying she felt like she'd hit rock bottom and didn't know how to fix things. I listened, and when she was done, I told her I forgave her. But I also made it clear that I wasn't going to step in and fix her problems anymore. I told her she needed to take responsibility for her own life, and that I was willing to rebuild our relationship, but only on the condition that she respected my boundaries going forward. She agreed, and we left things on a hopeful note. Since then, we've started reconnecting slowly. We've had a couple of low-stakes meetups, coffee, a quick lunch, just to rebuild the trust that was lost. It's going to take time, but I feel cautiously optimistic. Meanwhile, my parents have started acknowledging their role in enabling Hannah, which is a huge step for them. They've promised to stop pressuring me to step in and fix things, and I'm hopeful they'll stick to that. As for me, I'm in a good place. I'm focused on my career, my relationships, and my personal growth. It feels like I've finally found balance, and I couldn't be more grateful for the journey that brought me here. To everyone on Reddit who followed this saga and offered advice, thank you. Your support made a huge difference and helped me see things more clearly when I was stuck in the chaos. I'm finally at peace, and for the first time in years, I feel like I'm living for myself.